We thank you for joining us for the 2023 spring session on this vernal equinox, the first day of spring. Yay! We have lots to cover because we're eager for participants to learn and consider what you hear through the lens of your faith tradition's teachings. And then we hope that you will be motivated to act for justice. So as we commence our session, I like to first recognize and remember the Native people who were removed from the place where we presently sit. Most of us are in Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax. Those groups likely include the Piscataway, the Anacostank, the Pamunkey, the Mattapinean, the Nanjameek, and the Toxahent. We also recognize and remember the enslaved people of color, separated from their families and native lands by force and made to labor under harsh conditions to build this Northern Virginia region. Let us take a moment of silence, each through our own faith lens, and pray for ourselves, our families, our community, our Commonwealth, our country, our world, and our planet. Thank you. Most of you are familiar with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. If you're not, go to our website, www.virginiainterfaithcenter.org. And remember that we are a 501c3 organization, and we depend on the support of individuals, faith communities, and foundations for our support so we can continue to do the work that we've been doing. We encourage you to respond to any action alerts that your participation and to support us with your financial resources. Our presenters tonight are the super leader of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, Ms. Kim Bobo, and the budget explainer, Rodrigo Soto, from the Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis, another outstanding and excellent 501c3 nonprofit organization, which actually began and was incubated in the Virginia Interfaith Center's work several years ago. We'll facilitate your questions, but just for a few minutes, so the clock might likely preclude being able to answer everything. And one of our team members, June Stowe, is going to keep her eyeball on the chat for those questions, and she'll facilitate them. Let's see. So without further ado, let's take the plunge. This session is about reviewing what happened at the 2023 General Assembly, and importantly, what our Northern Virginia legislators had to do with what happened at the 2023 General Assembly. And after Kim presents and we answer a few questions, we will turn our attention to Rodrigo, who is going to brief us on the unfinished business of the Virginia budget and action that still needs to be taken. So it's time to listen up. Kim Bobo,
all righty.
No introduction. You have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I am in the middle of a choir rehearsal. I've snuck out to do this, and the internet here at the church is not the best, but if there's a problem, let me know, and I'll try and switch to my phone. Let me quickly run through where we ended up so far, and Rodrigo can tell you where we are in terms of the budget things. Of course, one of our big efforts was on trying to limit solitary confinement in Virginia. We did get a modest bill through both houses. It's not the dream bill. It doesn't limit it to only 15 days. It does provide some modest sort of procedural kinds of things. And we ended up believing that it is a first step and that we should support it. There's actually been some controversy in the coalition, but I think everyone's disappointed that it doesn't have the 15 days. But what is amazing is we got a bill out of public safety in the House. And we got a lot of support from a huge number of Republicans who really stuck their neck out on this one. In the Senate, it had been led by Senator Morrison, but the person who helped get it out of committee was Barbara Favola. It was her committee, and she really helped make that happen. And Delegate Hope was a longtime supporter of this in the House, and so spoke up for it, encouraged the Republicans, and really, I think, helped make it happen because of his work over the last few years. There was a good bill that we supported that Senator Boysko led to give free phone calls in prisons. And that bill made it out of the Senate. We thought we had a shot in the House, and then once again, it was killed in the House. And then Senator Marsden had a bill on oversight of the Department of Corrections. And his bill got through the Senate, got out of the Public Safety Subcommittee, the Public Safety Full Committee. We thought we were kind of doing well. It got sent over to the Appropriations Committee, and some of the same people who voted for it in committee voted against it in the Appropriations Committee. And I was like, what's going on here? Why did you vote against this? And what they said was, Kim, when we go into the Appropriations Committee, our vote is not our own. And we were told we had to vote against this one. So apparently it came down from the governor's office that they didn't want oversight on the Department of Corrections. Now, there's still money for it in the Senate budget. It's not in the House budget. And we hear they may well end up in the final budget having money for it. And so even though it hasn't officially been authorized, they would move forward in trying to set up the office even without that authorizing legislation. So we think we've got a shot at it, even though it doesn't look good. So all the public document sounds like it's dead, but it's not really dead. So don't give up hope on that one. On health equity, we ran 3 bills in a kind of maternal health package. One of them was killed in both houses, and 2 of them got out and are on their way to the governor. They're at the governor's office. One is a study on perinatal health hubs, which is kind of a new model for doing birthing center kind of things. And the other one is allowing registered midwives to be able to administer basic life-saving drugs to people. So both of those are good things. We also, the Commonwealth Institute was helping lead an effort on Cover All Kids. And so we kind of ended up supporting it. We hadn't done a lot of work on it, but we decided to support it because I think this is a really important issue for us for next year. And so a bill got out of the Senate, got killed in the House, but we wanted to support it and start getting people familiar with the bill so that we can really work on it next year. It's basically an expansion of Medicaid to cover undocumented kids who would otherwise be eligible for Medicaid, right up our alley. On the worker family related issues, paid sick days, again, got a bill through the Senate, got killed in the House. We knew that was going to happen. I think we have to change some of the people in the House to get a paid sick day bill out. I do think the governor is going to sign the bills. But again, the governor has surprised some of us, but we think we'll get the support from the governor on that. There's also a little bit of money in both budgets, both the House and the Senate budget, for child care assistance, not nearly as much as we and others had been hoping, but $20 million in the House, $40 million in the Senate. So there's likely to be some money for childcare assistance. On affordable housing, we did a lot of work this year. It's really a priority in the faith community. So we supported a bunch of money for affordable housing, and most of it is not in the budget. There is some contingency money for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. Now, contingency is like, if there's leftover money, and honestly, I don't think there's going to be leftover money. So I think the odds of that are really not very good. So again, we really did not get much in terms of new money for affordable housing. We also supported a whole set of tenant protections, and honestly, 2 very modest bills got through, and that's it. The rest of them were killed. It was not a very friendly legislature to tenant reforms this year. And we had thought the governor was going to have some reforms around permitting and so forth that didn't appear. So there was really nothing for us to support there. There really were no common sense gun reform bills that had a shot, so we did not work there. And there really weren't major efforts to roll back minimum wage or in-state tuition for immigrants or any of that. So again, it really wasn't as bad as we thought it might be in some of those areas. So that's kind of the brief summary. I don't see how we move some of these things without some change in leadership in the House. And it's not just the party, but it's like the individuals who are chairing some of the committees. And so I think we've really got to try and focus on getting people who support our issues elected in Virginia. Now we're going to be doing nonpartisan work. But there's a lot we can do to get people to vote, to get legislators to know about our issues, for people to know what legislators, where they stand on some of these issues. So we've actually put together an entire sort of civic engagement plan. Robert Lester is on the phone, on the call tonight, so he can wave at people. I'm not sure how he waves right now and how you see him, but he's on the call, going to be leading our civic engagement efforts. We're going to be partnering with the League of Women Voters and the NAACP on doing some candidate forums. We've mapped out sort of where are all the tight races in the state, and essentially they're in Henrico County around Richmond. There's a lot of them down in the Hampton Roads area. There's a bunch of races in Prince William County. There's a couple races in Loudoun, and then there are some random races in Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania area, Petersburg, and Williamsburg. And those are really the tight races in the state. And so I think we are really going to focus on trying to do voter registration, turnout, and education in those priority districts, as well as trying to build on some of the work we did last year with unregistered voters who are Muslim. We were able to buy a list of unregistered voters who are identified as Muslims, and we did a mailing to them. We did calls to 4,500 of them, and we're trying to track exactly what produced on that. But I think we're going to do a little bit more there because it's a very visible group that I think we could make a difference on. In terms of, I saw a question in the chat about Senator Marsden. He used to work at Child Protective Services in terms of juvenile justice. And he ran the juvenile justice system. And so he was like the perfect champion for this in the Senate. And I heard him when he was both testifying for the bill in the Senate and in the House. And he talked to legislators about, do you know who is the most dangerous person in the juvenile justice system? And he said, it's me. It's the person in charge of juvenile justice, because we have so much power and we often don't really know what's going on. And we have almost complete power in our system. There's no oversight, there's no management that we're accountable to. And so we really need that kind of accountability in the system. And so because he'd been in the job, he was just an unbelievably good advocate for doing this. And so I can't say enough good things about Senator Marsden's leadership on this oversight issue at the Department of Corrections. All right, let me stop and see if there are questions.
Right. What was the opposition coming out of the governor's office? That was in relationship to,
Solitary confinement.
I guess.
Yes, June, I finally heard your question. So what happened was we actually got a bill out of the public safety, both the subcommittee and the full committee, that had a limit on 15 days, except, with some exceptions, but essentially you couldn't be locked up in solitary for more than 15 days. It had some modest language around notification of lockdowns. It had most of the stuff we wanted. Now, again, every time we turned around, the Department of Corrections wanted changes, but again, we were working it, we were getting it through until it went to appropriations, at which point the Attorney General's office called our patron, Delegate Davis, and said, we are going to oppose the 15 days. And we're going to oppose notification on lockdowns. At which point Delegate Davis said, look, I can't hold the Republican votes if the Attorney General stands up and opposes this. And apparently the Attorney General, I honestly could never understand why they cared about notification on lockdowns. I met with 3 of their top staff. No one could explain to me why that was such a problem, because other states and cities do it. On the issue of 15 days, they essentially thought it would open the department up for lawsuits. And I suspect that's true if they had not followed the law. And I think what it is saying is that they were going to struggle to follow the law and limit the use to only 15 days, except for the designated exceptions on this. And that makes sense to me because, if you look at their own numbers that they've put out, they had close to 3,000 people in solitary for more than 15 days. So again, this is a widespread pattern in Virginia. And so the Attorney General's office just said, no, we can't do it. It's going to open us up to lawsuits. And, my response is they should follow the law. And if they follow the law, it wouldn't open them up to lawsuits.
Along with that, the oversight legislation, that was also vetoed in the governor's office, right? Or they did not want the oversight?
That's correct. That's correct. It was the governor's office that weighed in and told people in the leadership and the Republicans and the appropriations that they needed to kill that. Mm-hmm.
Do you know why? I mean,
is there any idea? I'm told why they don't want any oversight. I mean, that's the bottom line. The Department of Corrections has conveyed to the governor that they really don't want any oversight, because oversight would likely bring to light sort of abuses that are happening within the system, and they don't want that kind of oversight. So they are opposing it. Now, almost every Republican, in fact, every Republican on the Public Safety Committee, like this is the committee that oversees the Department of Corrections, every single one of them voted for the oversight bill. They know they need it, but the governor's office opposed it. I think we're going to see it, though. I think something's going to come out in the budget, and so we can get this thing set up.
Okay, Bob.
Kim, I wonder if you could comment on SB 842, the second look. I understand it went through the Senate with very solid support, but it was passed by indefinitely in the House. Do you know what went on there? What the problem was with the House?
I don't know. I could find out. Hey, John, I was trying to be supportive, but frankly, covering too many bills at that point. Okay. So I just don't know the behind the scenes politics on that one.
I understand.
John,
it's my senator that had the bill, so I don't know if they had a problem with him or what.
No, actually Republicans like Chap Peterson. Okay. They like him.
Thank you.
John, could you just say a little bit more about that bill? What was that bill?
Well, their sentences would be reviewed, if they were good prisoners and didn't get any trouble, and And they could
And they'd
be,
spent more than 15 years in
yeah,
prison.
yeah, they could be reviewed for early release, but not, and now you're taking away the incentive, for them to work toward getting out early. And a lot of them probably were thinking in terms that it was going to pass and that they would get out early, and then their dream is, crushed. So,
Right.
So another vote of sorts, vote for voting this coming and
Yes.
changing some of those seats. Okay,
And question,
Yes, absolutely.
go ahead, Jack.
good to see you again, Kim, and thank you for the report. Our Lewisville Faith in Action had our meeting last night, and we sort of parallel your experience. All the good bills made it through the Senate, including banning assault weapons and ghost guns, the whole business, a lot of good climate stuff. Got to the House, they were all killed. We wound up in a virtual tie. So what we kind of decided last night is, and that's why I was delighted to hear your words, that you were going to concentrate on some electoral strategies in Henrico County, Loudoun, Fredericksburg, Williamsburg, I think you said. And I'm just saying, when you pull that together, we'd be delighted to work with you on that, because we got to change the House or the good stuff's not going to get through. So
We'll talk more
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
that a little bit later in the meeting, Jack.
good.
Any other questions for Kim Bobo before she goes back to practicing her Holy Week liturgy music?
Good.
I don't see anybody's hands.
All right.
You know
Thank
how to
you,
raise your hand.
everybody.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate
Yes,
that.
thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Rodrigo, where are you? It's just about time for you.
I'm here and ready for you.
There you are. Well, we need some explaining on the Virginia state budget and what's going on with it, and where is it at today, and where is it going to be, what, tomorrow maybe, or next week? So it's all yours. And thank you very much for joining us. First, you're going to tell us a little bit about the Commonwealth Institute, because everybody doesn't necessarily know about that.
Yeah. Well, first off, Anne, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and so many other people who are so committed to doing the good work here in Virginia and lifting up our friends and neighbors who are, oftentimes ignored in the legislative and budget process. A little bit about myself. My name is Rodrigo Soto. I am the Revenue Campaign Manager here at the Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis. We're essentially like the state progressive think tank following state fiscal policy focused on tax and revenue, economic opportunity, so like worker rights, healthcare, and education. And I'm on the tax and revenue team alongside Megan, keeping up with many of the moving pieces of tax policy. Once I get to my presentation, you'll notice that tax is generally the biggest area of difference right now between the two chambers, and it ripples down to a number of priorities that you all have previously mentioned and talked a little bit with Kim about, so I'm happy to provide an update on that. And I'm timing myself actually, I was told 15 to 20 minutes, and as just a little bit about myself, as a former legislative and campaign staffer, I like to keep myself within the time frame that I'm told to stay within.
I appreciate that, but you know what? You got a couple of extra minutes because Kim finished a little bit early.
All good, perfect. Then I will, the slide that I have, and I'll share my screen shortly, are a little bit numbers heavy. I just want to give a preface that I'm happy to go back at any point after I speak, just to kind of go over some of the very specific numbers. Some of the questions might require a little bit more than what I'm able to provide in terms of like budget analysis. So when you put those questions in the chat or ask them, I might have to just follow up via email individually, just so that I can get you the most accurate information. You'll notice that the budget moves a lot, so it requires us to either provide modeling, new modeling, kind of new data, sometimes in a very quick turnaround for both lawmakers and advocates, so that they can stay informed of what's going on in the legislature. So I think I've given a brief enough introduction, so I will actually share my screen.
And while you're doing that, I'll just like to tell you that I thought the side-by-side that TCI did was just excellent. And so if you can put a link to that in the chat before our whole program is ended, you don't have to do that right this minute. I think that would be very helpful to people.
Yeah, I actually include some screenshots of our side-by-side, so everyone will get a little bit of a preview, and I'll definitely
Okay, great.
do it
Thank
after this. Awesome. So just a little bit about what we'll talk about today. And again, I'm very cognizant of the time that I have, so I want to make sure that I'm pacing myself at a pace that kind of gets us to get the information and also have time for questions and answers, since I think there'll be a lot of questions after this. So we'll talk a little bit about where we are on the budget, some of the key differences that we have between the budget proposals put forth by the Virginia House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate. What can you do as an advocate? And then we'll go to questions and answers. So this is generally what the Virginia budget process looks like, though we did add an amendment to this graphic just because there was something known as a stopgap measure that was put forth, just because budget negotiators were not able to come up with a budget before they adjourned their regular session this year. So you'll notice in the process where we are right now is kind of around a conference committee negotiates differences and offers a compromise proposal. So up till now, the governor has proposed budget amendments. There's been public hearings. Lawmakers have considered these in their respective money committees in the chambers of in each of their legislative chambers. Each chamber has voted on their own proposal. They've passed it to the other chamber to vote, and now because there's many differences, they have to negotiate kind of a final agreement. When they were getting ready to adjourn, though, there was what's known as a stopgap measure that had to be passed for some technical amendments or technical updates that needed to be made and approved by the legislature. You may have heard in the news that the governor's administration had miscalculated funding that would cost Virginia schools a pretty serious amount of money. And because of that and a couple other things like deposits to Virginia's revenue reserves, deposits to the Virginia retirement system, they kind of came with they're calling it a skinny budget, but it's just like must pass things that they knew they just had to approve while they start negotiating, or while they continue negotiating some of the bigger proposals. So where we are right now is at 8. There is, some opportunities we've heard in the news that negotiators will kind of get back this week to continue negotiations. And, between, now, yesterday, tomorrow are all good times for you all to get involved. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this, of how you can get involved with this process. So as I was mentioning earlier to Anne, I do have some screenshots. So TCI, what we do, one of our most acclaimed products that we put out is an analysis of the key budget policy decisions from the governor, the Virginia House of Delegates, and the Virginia Senate. You'll notice we try to put it right, literally just, it's called a budget side by side because we put it side by side, just the information for you to see where the money is going, where it's not going. Budgets at the end of the day are moral documents. Who we decide to fund, programs that we decide to fund or not fund speak to who and what lawmakers value. So I started off with kind of like the key base of the budget. At the end of the day, the tax policy decisions that each legislature chamber passes determines how much research, how much money is available to spend on other things. So as you'll notice here, the House of Delegates prioritizes some pretty costly tax proposals, such as decreasing the corporate income tax rate, decreasing the individual income tax rate, kind of the top tax bracket that exists right now, and a couple of other things. They total about $1 billion, as you've maybe heard in the news, the $1 billion difference. I do want to put a little bit of a caveat that it's $1 billion in this budget cycle, and it balloons drastically in the next budget cycle, only because budget years and tax years don't start at the same time. The fiscal year for the budget is kind of a midway point of the year. So like it starts in July 1, and then tax year start, obviously tax year January 1. So because of that difference, there's actually a much higher cost to the proposals put forth by the governor and that have been approved by the House of Delegates. But you'll notice that the Senate did not include the $1 billion tax cuts that the governor proposed, leaving them with $1 billion to make in investments in many of the things that we'll talk about in just a second. So keep that in mind as we talk about some of the other key policy decisions. I want to preface this with just, again, I'm happy to provide this to folks individually afterwards or by email, but just to give you an example of what the proposals from the governor mean. We have some modeling with the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy that shows the governor's plan on taxes, particularly those around individual income taxes, they primarily benefit the wealthiest among us. So like essentially the top 1%. You'll notice here on the far right, the tax change that he proposes would give someone who makes, who makes $2 million and above, or kind of their average quintile, so the top 1% of Virginia, about a $5,000 tax cut on average. But the lowest income folks are our friends and neighbors who are probably hurting most at times of inflation and these economic uncertainties that we're going through. They get nothing. And, that's kind of a similar conversation around increasing Virginia's standard deduction. All that to say, this proposal particularly, it's not only going to cost Virginia a lot of money, not just this budget cycle, but the next budget cycle, which could go to things like schools, roads, et cetera, et cetera. It's benefiting some of the wealthiest among us, the people who don't really struggle to pay for eggs, the people who aren't worried about how much groceries are going to cost next week, while leaving behind the folks that are struggling to pay for some of the things that we've noticed, some of the goods and services that we've noticed have increased at times of inflation. So just wanted to kind of give that as a little bit of a what do these tax proposals mean for folks? Now, as I was talking a little bit earlier, the Senate rejects a majority, and if not all of the governor's tax proposals, or the costly and untargeted ones, I will say, which gives them a lot of money. And you might have heard this in the news, but because of this, the Senate is able to make about $1 billion additional investment in public K-12 education. So that is really transformative for the kids and families, particularly those that come from historically disadvantaged or underinvested communities in Virginia. So that's a pretty big difference in the two budget proposals that are being negotiated. On healthcare, Kim talked about this, so she saw a little bit of my thunder. But for those who know me personally, I grew up as an undocumented immigrant in this country. I spent most of my life actually as an undocumented immigrant. Only recently, last year, became a citizen. And I personally know the barriers that exist when it comes to being an undocumented kid just trying to go to the doctor. There's been so many times where I would be too afraid of the medical bill. I'd be more afraid of the medical bill than to treat like a broken bone. And I have a little bit of a scar because I had to I had an accident and ripped a tendon. So I had to get surgery to reconstruct my tendons. All of that, like, I remember when that happened, I was like, we can't call 911. Like, we're undocumented. Like, this is going to cost us like more than I can afford. We need to like drive to the hospital instead of like get an ambulance. But so all that to say, the Senate actually includes funding to cover kids who are, currently without healthcare coverage because of their immigration status. That's one of the big transformative things that the Senate is able to invest in because they do not, and they reject, they do not approve it. They strongly reject the tax proposal. That frees up funding to meet some of these unmet needs that we have in Virginia. So engaging in the budget process. This is, oftentimes one of the trickiest things. I will say on a personal note, and also as a former legislative staffer, I always found the budget process to be the least transparent, but most important negotiation in the legislature. And I say that because, generally, and I mean, other states do it different ways as well, but generally what happens is once they get into this conference committee, these negotiations are like not open to the press, they're not open to public hearings, we can't live stream what folks are saying. These are behind the doors negotiations, oftentimes between a very, very small select group of people. And right now in Virginia, the biggest, players in this are just 3 people, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a second, but 3 people will decide kind of the impact of the budget on our communities. So first off, why should we even focus on the budget? It's not the same as a bill. So the budget determines how our money is used. That's probably the most important thing for you to know. It's where our education funding comes from, roads, the potholes that you are stressed about, when you're driving out of your neighborhood, all the way to how much teachers are being paid, or whether or not we are covering kids who are currently without healthcare coverage because of their immigration status. And the budget actually is a bill. I mean, the budget is a bill. So policy decisions can be determined by budget language. So lawmakers can determine whether to have things like language that the Senate budget includes to provide localities the authority to increase sales taxes at the referendum of voters. So voters have to vote on it to essentially approve it to be used for school construction. And school construction across Virginia is one of the costly, it's a multi-billion-dollar, funding gap that exists. I mean, there are schools that have had, that just are not to the standard that we would want to send our kids in. And this is a very important tool in the toolbox to be able to allow for funding to be increased for school construction. Another thing to note is when it comes to Virginia, what wins, the budget or the Virginia code? The budget wins. So the budget actually supersedes it. So if you include non-funding policy changes that maybe conflict with Virginia's code, the budget language will win at the end of the day. And you can talk about the budget. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But as I was talking about, I know this is the Northern Virginia chapter of the Interfaith Center. So actually, 2 of the most important budget negotiators are in this region. Senator George Barker and Senator Janet Howell co-chair Virginia's Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. And the districts or areas that they represent are here at the bottom. Just so that you can know if you live there. I will say redistricting has changed a lot of things. So Senator George Barker in particular, his district actually is not the same as this in the new district that he's running for, but the district that he currently represents are the parts of Fairfax County, parts of Prince William County, and parts of Alexandria City. And he still currently represents you, and will, as if you're a constituent of his, you can write to him as a constituent of his. And Senator Janet Howell represents parts of Fairfax and Arlington County. And this is actually her last legislative session, as she's announced that she's retiring and will not be seeking re-election this year. There are other, let me go back. The reason I say is because these 2 are, the key people, along with Delegate Barry Knight, who chairs Virginia's House, the House Appropriations Committee. Those 3 are going to determine tax policy for the budget. Why that's so important, as I mentioned at the beginning, is other budget conferees, and there are others as well, they can't really get to work on the funding decisions that we were talking about, and I'm happy to talk about at the questions and answer portion at the end as well. They're not able to come up with these decisions until the resources available in the budget are determined. Are we going to move forward with most or some of the tax cuts the governor's proposed? and how much revenue will that decrease for things that could go to education, healthcare, so on and so forth. So they are the two key people right now, because they need to go negotiate with Chairman Knight on a final tax proposal, and then let conferees know, so that then they can start making those decisions. You know, we have XYZ amount to spend on the budget because these are the decisions we made with tax policy. Here's how we can start making these funding decisions moving forward. So that is why they're very, very key right now. There are two other Northern Virginia lawmakers, Senator Dick Saslaw, or Richard Saslaw, and Delegate Mark Sickles, say the areas that they represent here. They're part of what's the Budget Conference Committee, so they also, you know, are part of these negotiations for a final budget. You know, generally I'm asked to, and I'm doing great on time. Please thank my many years being a legislative staffer for being really good about this. But budget advocacy is something that happens year round. I think a common misconception is that you can only talk about the budget or bills during the legislative session, and that's not the case. Actually, if you only just start talking about it when the legislative session starts, you're a little late, because a number of things have already happened, whether it's the governor's proposed budget, to public hearings that have happened on the budget, so on and so forth. So one, especially this year, because it is a big election year and there are a number of candidates running, and you can reach out to all of them to let them know what's important to you. So obviously I was talking a little bit about education just because it's a big thing that's being negotiated this year. But you can definitely reach out to all candidates. It's never too early, as I mentioned. Lawmakers are available to meet year round. They represent you not just during the legislative session, they represent you throughout the year. And unlike the legislative session, if you go down to Richmond or try to schedule a meeting in a very fast-paced environment, one, because it's so fast-paced, the lawmaker might not be available to meet because they might be in committee, they might be on the floor, they might be in between meetings, they might be being pulled multiple places at once. And I can guarantee you that as a former legislative staffer myself, that there's just a lot of moving things. And sometimes at most you might have like a 5 to 10 minute conversation with someone. But if you meet with them in the off session right now, when they're not actively in Richmond and actively voting and having, you know, what's a very fast-paced environment in a very short legislative session, you could be given 15, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes even an hour. I mean, it depends on the lawmaker, obviously, and the conversation, but you'd be given a lot more time to talk about these priorities. It's important, you know, one tip I always tell folks is to have leave behind materials or a follow-up email, only because lawmakers have within their office like individual systems in place to track kind of what they're hearing from constituents. So am I hearing 20 people support increased education funding versus one person who writes about wanting school vouchers? You know, each office does it differently. And I had my own system when I was in the House of how to tell my boss, like, we have these number of people who've written about this. The House has a really pretty system. It's called IHOD, but it like lets you communicate live, especially when they're on the floor. So it's a really, everyone, like I shared, everyone has their own system, but it's really good to, especially if you do it before a legislative session starts, to, you know, have folks know what's important in the community ahead of time. Staying engaged is important with your lawmaker. Many do e-newsletters, they do or host session town halls. Regional delegations like the Fairfax delegation, Loudoun, Prince William County, so on and so forth. They actually host pre-session town halls right before the legislative session, where all the lawmakers that represent the locality hold a public hearing for many hours to hear about what's important in the community. There's budget town halls as well that are usually posted by the money committees. So money committee members host regional town halls to hear feedback on the budget. So that is all I have. Oh, I need to stop sharing them. That is all I have for where we are at the budget, and I am 30 seconds ahead of what I promised. So.
All right.
That's great. June is going to facilitate questions. So for all of you, if you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand so she can call on you. There are some in there now, June.
Yes. I have two, why does the budget supersede the Virginia code?
Yeah, I think that's just a constitutional, that might be in the Constitution. I think Delegate Watts is on here and might be able to verify that, but that is my understanding of why that's the budget supersedes the state code.
Okay, and then this person also had, she's heard a lot of chatter about the increase in property taxes. Will that affect the budget?
So property taxes are determined by your locality. I will say on a tax, as a conversation of taxes, localities have limited taxing authority. So the way that they build their budgets, unlike other parts of, oh, actually, Delegate Watts raised her hand, so I will let her speak really quick on the why Virginia budget supersedes the state code. I think she's unmuted right now.
Well, we'll come back to Vivian when.
She says her mic is not working. Delegate Watts, I think you're more than welcome to put an answer in the chat for folks on that as well. On the second question, on the property taxes, I was just quickly sharing, localities have very limited taxing authority. So it's, your property taxes, so on and so forth. Localities, unlike Virginia, can't tax things such as income, which it would probably be a more progressive way of going about, ability to pay versus something that's a little bit more aggressive like Virginia's property taxes. So I think it's a very new conversation still, and there haven't been bills around it. But if localities were given additional authority, ideally in ways that are more progressive than regressive, and by regressive I mean some regressive taxes put a higher burden on people with lower incomes than people with higher incomes, versus a progressive tax would take into account someone's ability, based on their ability to pay, so that we're not overburdening some of our lower income neighbors, especially now. So there's again a lot of chatter, especially obviously in the localities up here in Northern Virginia, kind of given the high cost of living. I will say, we have long wanted to have that conversation about increasing local authority to raise revenue in more creative ways, so that it would be kind of more of a fair share versus the regressive system we have now.
Anyway, we have just another minute or so. Are there any other questions?
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, the General Assembly passed a bill to mandate TANF increases at the rate of 10% a year until they get up to 50% of the poverty law. I mean, the federal poverty level. And I understand that it was the governor did not put it in the budget, and the House did not have a bill, but Senator Favola got it, and I think it's in the budget now. Can you confirm that? And it's a mandate, and they're not at 50%. So we would really like to see that passed.
The word mandate is so interesting, and it kind of goes back to the state code supersede the budget. And here's a really powerful example of that, because again, if the budget chooses not to fund it, even if there's a legislative mandate, the budget will win. So you are correct, John. The Senate provided 1.2 million in general funds and 9.8 million in non-general funds, so the federal dollars, for a 10% increase for TANF.
Awesome.
But the House does not. So that will be, again, because it is one of the big differences, be one of the things that they have to negotiate in the coming days, weeks, months. We don't know these days. It's never a set timeline here. It's been met very few times where the legislature has actually met, their deadline of passing a budget on time. And it's
so it's
Thank
still
you,
negotiable, right?
Yeah,
It is.
you. We have one more minute, and
Ron, I see your little hand up at the top of your screen. Did you have a question?
Ron Wiersman.
Yeah, not a question. I put in the chat an answer to the question about property taxes. What municipalities are doing, they're not increasing the taxing amount, but they're unbelievably increasing the appraisal of the property, which raises taxes. Like my son was telling me today, his taxes went up $600 in 1 year. And I know, so that's how the municipalities are raising taxes, and they can get around the state codes that way because they raise the appraisal of the property, which raises the taxes.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I think at this point we are running short. We have to move on. With great bow of gratitude to Rodrigo for helping us understand what I consider personally a very complex kind of issue. And the thing that I loved the most was Rodrigo starting out, because this has been my mantra for as many years as I've been doing advocacy work. The budget is a moral document. The state budget, your county or city budget, your own personal budget, whatever your budget allots money for, tells the world what is important to you. And so if you were to share that with others, what would people think you are all about? Well, what do we want the Commonwealth of Virginia to be all about? And that's why this budget is important. And that's why I think personally, it's so important for people of faith, particularly, to really rabble rouse as loudly as you can in the good years and the bad years. But it's up to us to really let those legislators who work for us, we're paying them exactly what we want them to be doing with our money. So, amen on that in terms of me. I am happy to say thank you, Rodrigo. And I'd like to introduce Nancy Morrison, one of the members of our leadership team here in the Northern Virginia chapter. Nancy's going to tell us a little bit more about the chapter and a little something about the role of congregations and what she does as a congregation liaison. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks, Anne. I am a member of Burke Presbyterian Church. I'm happy to see a lot of our Burke Pres members on this call. I've been a liaison for several years for Virginia Interfaith. And the main thing that I do is pass along information from Virginia Interfaith. Our church is wonderful about putting notices like tonight's meeting in our all church emails. I also encourage everyone, all the members, to sign up for the weekly newsletters that come out, especially during the General Assembly, because there will be calls to action that are tailored to your senators and your delegates. Virginia Interfaith is fantastic about doing that. If there's some vote that's coming up, then they will let you know. So I pass along basic information. We have monthly meetings. We had one today from 12 to 1 with Sheila Hurley, a staff member from Virginia Interfaith Center. And I was really excited to hear about their initiative coming up on civic engagement, and was really pleased to hear that Virginia Interfaith will support faith communities in their civic engagement efforts. And so I was really happy to hear that. They will provide all kinds of information. We also can find out about events related to or put on by Virginia Interfaith, such as Day for All People, which is their advocacy day that was back in January for the first time this year in several years. It was actually in person, and that's an awesome experience. If you get a chance to do that next January, it's wonderful to meet your senators and delegates face to face for advocacy. There are many events that you can find out on the Virginia Interfaith website. For instance, they have something that's called RAW Tools, RAW. It's an acronym, and it's called Guns to Gardens. This is not a Virginia Interfaith program, but the one thing that's so nice about this organization is that they promote other events that happen. And so there's a Raw Tools events, for instance, in April in the Hampton Roads area, not in our area. It's actually a gun take back where they have someone who is there who takes it to a blacksmith shop and they turn it into garden tools. So there's all kinds of things that you can find out through Virginia Interfaith that are also going on. I would encourage you to find out if your congregation has a liaison, and if not, consider becoming one. I feel so much more in the know because of all the information that I gained from the communications and also things like today's meeting. We had an overview again of legislative action and things like that, things to focus on. And they're so wonderful. Virginia Interfaith is so wonderful about helping set up town hall meetings or Zoom meetings, especially in the really only in the off season, not the General Assembly. So I've sat in, Ed Kringer, I think, is on this call. He organized a meeting with Eileen Fillercorn back in November that I was happy to join in. I've been in Zoom meetings with Dave Marsden, my senator. So they are very active year round. This is not just something where we hear and see them mostly during General Assembly. So if you, okay, and so I encourage you to find out if your congregation or your faith community doesn't have a liaison, to think about being one yourself. I'll be happy to give anybody more information. Thanks a lot. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That's great. And I hope that some of you who are active in your own faith traditions and communities will take Nancy's invitation to heart to perhaps become a congregation liaison. I also want to call everybody's attention to the chat. I hope you all know how to use that. Delegate Watts has put in a couple of comments in the chat that respond to some of the questions that people asked. And while you're doing that, nothing like, you have to multitask when you're really into doing a lot of this kind of thing, right? We want to wrap up in time. And so I'd like to, while you're reading the chat, I'd like for you to listen to Frances Dolan, one of our most prestigious team members. She has been working with me and with the leadership team at the Interfaith Center for the chapter for a while now. Frances, it's yours.
Thanks, Anne. Just kind of a quick summary, because we've heard an awful lot of very valuable information today. Kim Bobo shared with us that while VICPP didn't get all we wanted at the General Assembly this year, we got a start on a number of our priorities, including child care assistance, limiting solitary confinement, providing assistance for maternal health, and maybe a lead into some oversight for the Department of Corrections. She also shared with us that, thank goodness, there wasn't much rolling back of prior reforms and prior successes. And she reminded us through her examples that why it's important for us to elect people who support justice issues. And she highlighted that VICPP will be partnering with the League of Women Voters and NAACP again this year, which is an election year. And then we had the great pleasure of getting a briefing from Rodrigo Soto from the Commonwealth Institute, who explained to us the ongoing budget conference negotiations with the $1 billion gap between the House, the governor, and the Senate. And as Anne reemphasized for us, the budget is a moral document as well as a bill, and it can impact policy or even create it. He talked to us also about how to engage in the legislative process and reminded us of the important fact that we can reach out to candidates on key issues, such as funding for education, and we certainly can reach out to our legislators all year round. As citizens, our vote is our power, and elections make our voices heard on the issues we've been discussing this evening. And just a reminder again, in Virginia, all seats in the General Assembly will be on the ballot in November, and all Democratic and some Republican candidates will be chosen in primaries on June 20th. Because of redistricting, election districts and their numbers, as I've discovered, have changed for many of us, and it may be a pretty confusing time. So check your registration for voting now. Go to vote.elections.virginia.gov and update your registration if your address has changed. Consider sponsoring a voter registration drive in your congregation, and certainly encourage people you know to vote. Voting matters. Now, before I turn it back to Anne, just a word about our next chapter meeting, where we hope to see many of you there, in fact, all of you, and your friends and neighbors. It will be in May, probably mid-May, and we'll be covering civic engagement issues, which we've touched on some this evening, and the redistricting implications in more detail. And of course, we will include any legislative and budget updates. That's all that I have this evening, Anne, so over to you.
Thank you so much, Kay Frances. Thank you to the team here at the chapter for helping to organize this event. We hope it's been helpful. We're always short on time. I know that. It's good to leave people wanting for a little bit more, maybe. And I just once again encourage you to visit the Interfaith Center's website, virginiainterfaithcenter.org. Lots more information there. Visit the Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis. There's lots of more information there about the good work that they've been doing as well. And remember that both of these organizations are 501c3 not-for-profits and depend and rely on each of us to just give them a little bit of financial support to whatever your means can allow. Remember about that budget, the moral document, what's important? So perhaps find a way to send them a check. Thanks again for coming. And as Kay Frances said, we will have another session mid-May. And now, guess what? By RSVPing to be with us tonight, your name is in the database. And so you can expect to hear from us. And we don't barrage people with email, but you will hear from us as soon as we have that date certified. We welcome any feedback or input that you would like to offer as well. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for the speakers. You did a great job. And we appreciate everybody's time. And we're sorry we're 5 minutes over. So apologies for that. Take care. Have a great evening. Happy spring.